My daughter-in-law put her hand on the doorframe and said, "This meeting is for people named in the trust. You're not on the list, Sylvia." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. My son was standing right behind her and said nothing. I looked at them both. Then I looked down at the canvas tote bag on my arm, the one I'd been carrying since I left the house that morning. Inside was a manila envelope, sealed, labeled in my own handwriting. I'd been holding it for 6 months, waiting for exactly this moment. I said, "Then it's a good thing I brought my own." Neither of them moved right away. That surprised me. I think they expected tears. My name is Sylvia. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed property appraiser, raised 2 children mostly alone after my husband left, and took care of my older sister Audrey through the last 4 years of her life. I did all of that without asking anyone to notice. But that morning, standing in the doorway of a conference room at Hartwell and Price, I had something I hadn't carried in a long time. Proof. Let me go back. Audrey was 68 when the diagnosis came. Parkinson's, early onset. She'd been a high school history teacher for 36 years, the kind of teacher students still wrote letters to 15 years after graduation. She lived alone in the house our parents left behind, a craftsman bungalow in a quiet part of Tucson with a fig tree in the backyard and a porch that needed painting. She never married. Said she'd been too busy living to stop and set up house with someone. When she got the diagnosis, she called me first, not her doctor's office, not her attorney. Me. "I need you to know," she said, "before I tell anyone else." I drove to Tucson the next morning. I didn't tell my son Philip or my daughter-in-law Noelle that I was going. It wasn't their business yet. I thought it would become theirs eventually, out of basic human decency. I was wrong about that. Over the next 2 years, I made that drive every 2 weeks, 4 hours each way. I brought groceries, refilled prescriptions, sat with her through the appointment she didn't want to go to alone. There were nights I stayed 3 days straight because she couldn't manage the stairs without help. I rearranged my work schedule, took on fewer appraisals, stopped attending my Thursday book group. None of that felt like sacrifice at the time. It felt like what you do. Philip called on holidays. Noelle sent flowers once after a particularly bad stretch with a card that said, "Thinking of you, Audrey. No return address." My son is 40 years old. He works in commercial real estate. He is very good at identifying value in property and very poor at identifying it in people. Audrey knew. She never said it directly, not for a long time, but she noticed who came and who didn't. One afternoon we were sitting on her porch and she said, "You know, when Mother was sick, I drove down every weekend without being asked." She wasn't talking about me. She was noting a pattern. About a year before Audrey passed, she asked me to sit with her at her kitchen table. She had already spoken to her attorney, a man named Mr. Castellan, who'd handled her affairs for 20 years. She slid a piece of paper toward me across the table. "I want you to understand what I've done," she said, "so there are no surprises." She walked me through it. The house, the savings account, the small investment portfolio she'd built over 30 years of careful spending, all of it left to me, her only living sibling, the sole person who had, in her words, shown up without being summoned. She also told me about the amendment. There was an earlier version, she said, from 2015. Philip's name was in it. I looked at her. "I changed it last spring, after I asked him to come help me move the winter furniture and he said he couldn't get away." She folded her hands on the table. "I don't hold it against him, but I made a decision. I didn't ask her to reconsider." It wasn't my place. She was clear-eyed that day, steadier than she'd been in months. She signed the updated documents in front of 2 witnesses. Mr. Castellan filed them. I drove home with a copy in my bag and a feeling I couldn't quite name. Audrey died on a Tuesday in February. Quietly. She'd had a bad night and then a peaceful morning, and by the time I got there, she was already gone. I sat with her for a while before I called anyone. She would have done the same for me. The funeral was small. A few colleagues from the school district, 2 neighbors, a former student who drove in from Albuquerque, Philip came. Noelle did not. He said she had a work conflict. I didn't respond to that. After the service, he pulled me aside in the parking lot. "So," he said, "how is the estate being handled?" That was the question. Not "how are you doing?" Not "she seemed peaceful." Not "I wish I'd visited more." Just "how is the estate being handled?" I said I didn't have all the details yet and that Mr. Castellan would be in touch. He nodded like that was the expected answer and walked to his car. Over the next few weeks, he called more often than he had in the previous 3 years combined. Short calls, clipped, always circling back to the same thing. Whether I needed help managing the estate, whether I'd thought about what to do with the house, whether I knew what the property was worth because he had contacts in Tucson and could get it appraised quickly. He is a commercial real estate professional. He knows exactly what it's worth. I listened. I said I was still settling things. I said very little else. Then one evening, I overheard him on a call. I'd stopped by his house to drop off a box of Audrey's books he'd mentioned wanting, and the front door was unlocked. I stepped inside and heard his voice from the kitchen. "She doesn't have the head for it," he was saying. "The house alone is 400, easy. If she lets it sit, she'll just let it fall apart. We should be present when Castellan reads everything." I already emailed his office. I set the box down in the entryway. I didn't announce myself. I walked back to my car. That night, I opened my safe and took out the envelope. The letter from Mr. Castellan's office had arrived 2 weeks earlier. I was listed as the sole beneficiary. I was expected at Hartwell & Price on a Thursday at 2 o'clock. The letter had been addressed to me at my home with my full name. There was no ambiguity. I'd not told Philip. I arrived 10 minutes early. Parked, walked in, gave my name to the receptionist. She smiled and said Mr. Castellan would be right out. And then Philip and Noelle walked through the front door. I don't know how they got the address. Maybe he called the office and gave his name, said he was family, said it was routine. He's good at sounding like things are routine. Noelle reached the conference room door first. She put her hand on the frame and turned to me with an expression I can only describe as prearranged calm. "This meeting is for people named in the trust," she said. "You're not on the list, Sylvia." And there it was. My son said nothing. He was looking at the carpet. I said what I said. Then I held up the envelope. The receptionist had gone for Mr. Castellan. He appeared in the hallway before anyone could say another word. He looked at me, then at Philip, then back at me, with the particular expression of a man who has seen this specific type of situation before and is tired of it. "Mrs. Sylvia," he said, "please come in." He looked at my son. Mr. Harmon, I'm not sure who told you this was an open meeting, but it isn't. You're welcome to wait, and I'll speak with you briefly after, but the formal reading is a private matter between myself and the named parties." Philip started to speak. "Mr. Mana," Castellan said gently but without hesitation, "I'll be with you shortly." I followed Mr. Castellan into the conference room. The door closed. He set a folder on the table and opened it without ceremony. "I'll be brief," he said. "The estate is straightforward. Audrey named you sole beneficiary in the 2022 revision, filed and notarized with 2 witnesses. The house, the accounts, and all personal property. There's no conflicting document on record. This is clear." He paused. "I want you to be prepared. People sometimes behave unpredictably when they feel they've been passed over." I said I was prepared. He nodded once. "Then we'll proceed." I drove home that evening the long way, through the neighborhood where Audrey and I grew up. The elementary school was still there. The library branch where she used to take me on Saturday mornings was now a yoga studio, but the building looked the same. I parked for a moment in front of the old house, which belonged to strangers now, and sat there until the light changed. The house we grew up in was beige with green shutters. Our mother kept marigolds in window boxes every summer. I don't know why I thought about that on the drive home. Maybe because I was thinking about what you carry from the people who raised you and what gets lost. I made dinner, ate it alone, left the television off. The message from Philip came at 9:47 p.m. "Mom, I think there's been a miscommunication. Noelle and I weren't trying to cause a scene. We were just trying to understand the situation. Can we talk tomorrow? There may be options we haven't considered." Options. I read it twice. Then I set my phone face down on the counter. The next morning, I called Mr. Castellan. I want to move forward with the transfer, I said. The house, the accounts, everything. I want it done quickly and cleanly. He said he'd already started the paperwork. I also want protections in place. Legal ones. I don't want my son or his wife accessing any part of this estate, now or later. Not through my will, not through power of attorney, not informally. There was a brief pause. I can include a restriction clause. It's within your rights. Given what you've described, it's also advisable. Good. And one more thing. I had written this down the night before so I wouldn't soften it. I'd like to set up a trust. For my sister's former student, the one who drove from Albuquerque for the funeral. His name is Wesley. He taught at a public school for 8 years and just lost his position and a budget cut. Audrey mentored him for 4 years. She would want him to have something. Mr. Castellan said nothing for a moment. That's a thoughtful provision, he said. It's appropriate, I said. Philip showed up at my door on Saturday morning. He was dressed down, no tie, trying to look casual. He asked if he could come in. I let him, the same way you let someone into a room you've already decided to leave. He sat at my kitchen table. I didn't offer anything. Mom, he said, I know how it looked. How did it look? He shifted, like we were trying to cut you out. But that wasn't, you told someone on the phone that I didn't have the head for managing the estate. He went still. I heard you, I said. I walked into your house with Audrey's books and I heard you say it. He opened his mouth, closed it. I'm not angry, I said, and I meant it. I was for a while. But I've moved past angry into something quieter. I just want you to understand what you did. You waited until your aunt was buried to start asking about her property. You emailed her attorney without telling me. You walked into that office with your wife and tried to block me from a meeting I was invited to by name. We didn't know, you didn't ask. I folded my hands on the table, same as Audrey used to. You assumed I was confused, or passive, or manageable. You assumed the same thing you've assumed my whole life, that I'll smooth things over because I don't like conflict. He looked down. I raised you alone for most of your childhood, I said. I worked full-time and made your lunches and sat in the bleachers at every game even when I was exhausted. I lent you $22,000 across your 20s that you never mentioned repaying. I asked for nothing in return except basic respect. I paused. You couldn't even drive to Tucson twice a year. He didn't respond to that. The estate is handled, I said. I'm not going to discuss the terms. If you try to contest anything through a lawyer or otherwise, the no contest clause in my own will removes you from whatever I still control. His head came up at that. You're cutting me out of your will? I'm protecting what belongs to me. There's a difference. He sat there a while longer, not talking, not arguing, just sitting, the way children do when they don't know how to exit a situation their own choices created. Finally, he said, I don't know how we got here. I do, I said. But that's a conversation for a different day if you ever want to have it honestly. Today isn't that day. He left, no yelling, no door slamming, just a slow walk down the front path and a car pulling away from the curb. I washed the coffee cups and called my friend Margot. He came, I said, and it went the way it needed to. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Are you all right? I think so. I think I'm actually better than I've been in a long time. I hadn't expected that. I had expected to feel hollowed out, the way you feel after any kind of ending. But it wasn't that. It was more like the feeling after a long drive when you finally turn the engine off and realize your hands have stopped gripping. Noelle called the following week. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was careful, professional. She used phrases like misunderstanding and going forward, and our hope is to preserve the family relationship. It sounded like something drafted by someone who'd taken a conflict resolution seminar. I didn't return the call. I sent a text, please direct any questions about the estate to my attorney. Thank you. 2 days after that, a letter arrived from a law firm I didn't recognize. Heavy paper, gold letterhead, return address downtown. It was polite in the specific way that letters are polite when they want something from you. It referenced the estate of my sister Audrey, noted what it called certain procedural irregularities in the 2022 trust revision, and requested a consultation. I read it at the kitchen table. Then I made tea. Then I called Mr. Castellan. "Received it," he said. Before I could explain, my response went out this morning. "Will it hold? Their position has no legal foundation. Your sister was of sound mind in 2022. I was there. Her physician signed a capacity attestation at the time of signing. Her journals from that period are clear. This is bluster, but it could slow things down, temporarily possibly, not permanently." He paused. "May I say something personal?" "Go ahead. In 30 years of estate work, the people who fight the hardest for assets they were never promised are usually fighting for something else. Your son doesn't need the money, he needs to feel like he mattered in his aunt's life. Unfortunately, he's trying to solve that through litigation, and it won't work." I sat with that for a moment. "Thank you," I said. "File whatever you need to file." That night I pulled out Audrey's journals. I had kept them in a box in my closet, the ones from her last 2 years. Her handwriting had changed, smaller, more careful, but the sentences were sharp. She'd written about her students, about history, about the fig tree losing a branch in a windstorm. She'd written about me. There were 2 entries in particular, one from April 2022, 3 months before she revised the trust, one from the following September, 2 weeks after she signed. The April entry said, "Sylvia came today. She drove 4 hours to sit with me for 3 days, and she did it like it was nothing. Like, of course you come. Like, what else would you do? I have been trying to remember the last time someone did something for me without calculating what it cost them. I can't remember, but I don't have to remember. She's here." The September entry said, "The documents are done. I feel lighter. Not because of what I've given away, but because of what I've decided." You spend your life wondering whether the choices you made were right, whether you should have married, had children, been louder or quieter or braver, but you make one clear decision, one that costs you nothing because it only confirms what you already knew, and the wondering stops. I made copies of those pages, sent them to Mr. Butt. Castellan with a note, if they want proof of her judgment, give them her words. Philip filed the motion 3 weeks later. It was formal, documented, listing claims of undue influence and suggesting that my regular presence in Audrey's life during her illness constituted pressure. I read the language and I thought of every prescription I'd picked up. Every night I'd slept on her pull-out couch so she wouldn't be alone. Every time I'd held her arm walking to the car. They called it influence. It was presence. There is a difference, and I intended to make sure the court understood it. The hearing was on a Wednesday. Mr. Castellan had filed everything, the capacity attestation, the journal excerpts, the signed witness statements from the 2 neighbors who'd been there the day Audrey signed. Philip sat at the other table alone. His attorney was there, a younger man who looked like he understood the position he was in. The judge was unhurried. She read through the documentation with the attention of someone who isn't going to be moved by implication or assumption. She asked Mr. Spurney Castellan one question about the timeline of the revision. She asked Philip's attorney whether he had any documentation of actual undue influence or whether the claim rested on my having been present in my sister's home. His attorney said there was circumstantial evidence. The judge looked at him for a moment. Then she said the motion was denied. She said it in the same tone you'd use to say the weather was clear. Factual. Final. Philip didn't look at me. He gathered his papers and walked out. Outside, Mr. Castellan said the transfer would complete within 10 days. I thanked him. He said he'd send the final paperwork. I walked to my car. The sun was low and flat across the parking lot. I drove past the school where I'd appraised a gymnasium addition 12 years ago, past the church where Audrey's retirement party had been held, past the florist where I'd ordered the flowers for her service. The world looked the same. That's the thing they don't tell you about quiet justice. The world doesn't change. The light doesn't shift in any dramatic way. You just walk through it differently. At home, the answering machine was blinking. Wesley's voice. Hi, Sylvia. I hope this week hasn't been too hard. I wanted to let you know I've been thinking of you. Audrey used to talk about you, you know. She'd say you were the steady one, the one who never made a fuss but always showed up. I thought you should hear that. Call me if you ever want to talk. I sat down on the kitchen chair and listened to it twice. He'd known Audrey for 10 years. He'd driven 4 hours for a funeral where he barely knew anyone else in the room. He'd sent a handwritten card to my house afterward, 3 paragraphs long, specific and real, talking about what Audrey had taught him about patience. I called Mr. Castellan the next morning and confirmed the trust provisions. A week later, Wesley came by. I'd invited him for coffee, told him there was something I needed to explain. He brought a small plant, a rosemary in a terracotta pot. Said he'd heard rosemary was for remembrance. We sat at my kitchen table. I told him about the trust plainly, without ceremony. A portion of the estate set aside for him, enough to cover 2 years while he found another position or took a different path, whatever he chose. He was quiet for a long time. You don't have to do this, he said. I know. Then why? Because Audrey trusted you. Because you showed up when it mattered and didn't ask for anything. And because she would have done it herself if she'd thought of it in time. I looked at him. You reminded her what teaching was for. That mattered to her. It matters to me. He didn't argue. He just looked out the window at the rosemary he brought, sitting on the sill, and nodded slowly. We talked for 2 hours. About Audrey, about his students, about what he planned to do next. Ordinary things. Good things. The kind of conversation that fills a room without trying. When he left, he paused at the door. She told me once that you never needed anyone to see you working. You just worked. He looked at me. I see it. I closed the door and stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen and started writing. Not the legal paperwork, though, that was done. I wrote a letter. For my own records, for the file I keep in the safe. A letter that says, in plain language, what I once said after I'm gone. What I built, what I chose, what I gave away and what I kept. Why Wesley is in the documents. Why Philip is not as punishment, as record. I wrote it the same way I wrote appraisal reports for 31 years. Clear, accurate, without sentiment or softening. Here is what I found. Here is what it's worth. Here is my professional judgment, supported by evidence. I finished around midnight, sealed it, filed it in the safe next to Audrey's copy of the 2022 trust. Then I went to bed. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. Someone had left a porch light on down the street. It threw a long yellow stripe across the pavement, steady and still. I thought about Audrey in her last weeks, sitting by her window with the fig tree outside. She'd asked me once, on a particularly clear afternoon, whether I thought she'd made her life count. I'd said yes without hesitating. She'd looked at me and said, "You always know exactly what to say." I'd said, "I just tell the truth. You made it easy." She'd laughed at that, properly laughed, the way she used to when we were young and something caught her off guard. I fell asleep thinking about that laugh. The next Friday, I drove to Tucson. Not for any particular reason, just to see the house, which was mine now, which I hadn't decided what to do with yet. I parked in the driveway and sat for a while. The fig tree was starting to leaf out. The porch still needed painting. I got out of the car, walked to the front door, let myself in with the key I'd carried for 4 years. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it, bookshelves still full, her reading chair by the window, a cup on the drying rack she'd washed the morning before she died. I sat in her chair. I didn't feel sad exactly. I felt the weight of the place, the years it held, the life that had happened inside those walls. I felt the specific gravity of a house that has been loved by someone who knew how to love, without making demands. I stayed for an hour. Then I locked up, drove home, and stopped at the garden center on the way. Bought 2 flats of marigolds. I planted them in my own window boxes that evening. It took longer than I expected. My knees weren't happy about it. But I stayed out until it was done, until both boxes were full and the light was nearly gone and the whole front of the house smelled like summer. I stood on the porch when I finished. The street was quiet. A neighbor walked a dog past without looking up. Someone a few houses down was grilling, the smell of it drifting over the fence. Ordinary, completely ordinary. I went inside, washed my hands, and made dinner. If any of this sounds familiar to you, if you've been the one who showed up while others stayed away, the one who quietly kept everything running without recognition, the one who was standing in a doorway somewhere while someone told you that you weren't on the list, I want you to know something. You don't have to wait to be mentioned. You don't have to be quiet until it's too late to speak. You can carry your own envelope. You can know exactly what's inside it. The paperwork is just paperwork, but the life you build around it, the people you choose to witness it, the promises you keep, and the ones you finally stop keeping, that's what lasts. If this story meant something to you, I hope you'll leave a comment. Tell me about a time you finally opened your own folder. I'd like to know I'm not the only one who waited too long to start carrying it. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened, not in any abstract way, just in the plain, practical sense that every action in this story had a consequence that followed from it as naturally as water running downhill. Philip didn't show up for Audrey, not once in 4 years, not for a prescription run, not for a weekend visit, not for the quiet Tuesday mornings when she needed someone to sit with her while the medication leveled out. He made that choice consistently, over hundreds of small moments, and he made it freely. No one stopped him from coming. He simply decided that his time was worth more than her comfort. That's not a judgment, that's the record. And the record is what mattered in the end. What I've come to understand, more clearly now than I could have said it a year ago, is that integrity isn't something you display when it counts. It's something you build in private in the moments nobody is watching and nobody will ever know about. Every drive I made to Tucson, every night on that pull-out couch, every prescription I picked up in the rain, none of that was done to be witnessed. I did it because Audrey needed it and I was capable of doing it. That's the whole reason. But here's what I didn't fully understand at the time. Those choices were also building something for me. Every time I showed up, I was reinforcing my own sense of what I was worth and what I stood for. So when Noelle put her hand on that doorframe and said I wasn't on the list, I didn't crumble. I didn't apologize or ask for permission or look to my son to correct it. I already knew who I was. I'd been reminding myself for 4 years. That's what I mean when I say intelligence matters in this. Not cleverness, not strategy, not outsmarting anyone. I mean the kind of clear thinking that lets you see a situation for what it actually is, not what you wish it were. Audrey saw it. She said it plainly. They'll come when I'm gone. She wasn't bitter about it. She was accurate. And because she was accurate, she was prepared. She didn't wait to be betrayed and then react. She thought ahead, consulted her attorney, signed the documents while she was steady and clear, and left the record unambiguous. I try to live that way now. I try to ask myself not just what I want in this moment, but what the shape of my choices will look like 5 years from now. What will the record show? What will the honest accounting be? Wesley brought rosemary. He knew what it meant, and he brought it anyway, without being asked, without any expectation of what I would do with it. That's the kind of person who deserves to have something passed on to them. Not because he was strategic about it, but because he wasn't. He just showed up and was decent the same way decent people always do, quietly, without keeping score. I planted marigolds in my window boxes the evening after it was all finished. My knees complained the whole time. I stayed out until both boxes were full anyway, because my mother planted marigolds and her mother before her, and some things are worth the discomfort of continuing. If you've been the one who showed up, the one who stayed, the one who did the quiet, unglamorous work of caring for someone while others were too busy, I want you to know that it counted, even if no one thanked you. Even if no one noticed. You know what you did, and at some point that has to be enough to build on. Carry your own envelope, know what's inside it, you may never need to open it. But if you do, make sure you're ready to.